In this lesson, we're going to take a look at configuring OSPF authentication on Arista switches. We'll be leveraging the same 5 Arista switch lab that we've been using in all of our OSPF examples. Arista's implementation of OSPF provides the option for authentication. This authentication is in regards to our OSPF packets. This feature seems to have gained some more attention as there are now several virtual network solutions, for example, VMware's NSX, that can have system admins running routing protocols like OSPF. So between other teams attempting to run OSPF in our network, or perhaps a malicious actor looking to disrupt our OSPF protocol, authentication seems like a good idea and is simple enough to configure. Authentication of OSPF packets is not enabled by default, and there are 2 methods of OSPF authentication. The first is considered the simple method, where we assign a simple OSPF password to the interface. The second method of authentication is via message digest, where each interface is configured with a key and key ID pair. The OSPF interface then generates a string using MD5 and appends that string to the OSPF packets. The MD5 option is flexible in that it allows for easy key rollover. Each interface can have 2 keys with different key IDs, and the switch will transmit the OSPF packets with both keys. Then, when all interfaces have been updated with the new key and key ID, the old one can be retired. Let's configure simple authentication between switch 4 and switch 5. Switch 5 is in area 51 and connects to switch 3 and switch 4 as the ABRs, or area border routers. So first, on switch 4, let's take a look at which OSPF neighbors he has. Show IP OSPF neighbor. Enter. And we can see he has 3 neighbors, 0.2, which is switch 2, 0.1, which is switch 1, and 0.5, which is switch 5. And we can see that we're neighbored with switch 5 out interface Ethernet 5. Show run interface Ethernet 5. We can see by the description it is our connection to switch 5. So we're going to enter config interface Ethernet 5, and then here IP OSPF authentication in question mark, and you can see we have 2 options, authentication and then authentication dash key. First, we're going to issue the command IP OSPF authentication and hit enter, and then IP OSPF authentication dash key, and then a question mark shows this is where we can enter our unencrypted or encrypted key. So we'll use secrets as our key and hit enter. Now, if we issue the command show run interface Ethernet 5, we can see we have our IP OSPF authentication configured. And if we issue the command show IP OSPF neighbor, we can see that we've just lost switch 5 as a neighbor because we've yet to configure authentication on switch 5. So let's go do that now. End to get out of config mode, exit, and then we'll log into switch 5. And on switch 5, if we issue show run interface Ethernet 4, we can see that's the interface that we use to connect to switch 4. So we need to configure the matching OSPF under interface Ethernet 4. Config, enter, interface Ethernet 4, enter, IP OSPF authentication, enter, and then IP space OSPF authentication dash key, and then our key is secrets, and hit enter. Show run interface Ethernet 4 for verification. We can see that we have our OSPF authentication configured, and then show IP OSPF neighbor, enter. And we can see that switch 4 is coming in now full with switch 5. And then exit switch 5 and go back to switch 4, enter, and issue the command show IP OSPF neighbor, and we can see that switch 4 is now again neighbored with switch 5. And now, if we want to add in the MD5 based authentication, what I want to do is remove the simple authentication that we just created and add in the MD5 option. Show run interface Ethernet 5, and then config, and we'll do interface Ethernet 5, no IP OSPF authentication, and no IP OSPF authentication dash key. Exit, go over to switch 5, show run interface Ethernet 4, config interface Ethernet 4, no IP OSP authentication, and no IP OSP authentication key. And let's make sure we've reestablished our neighbor relationship. Show IP OSPF neighbor, and we can see our neighbor just came up with switch 4. Now let's use the MD5 option. Config, enter, interface Ethernet 4, IP OSPF authentication, enter, and then IP OSPF message digest key. And here we select our key ID. So let's type 1, question mark, and then we have the option to configure the MD5 authentication. So MD5 space question mark, and then our key. Let's do secrets again, enter. Verification, show run interface Ethernet 4. And we can see that we've enabled authentication, and at this time it's with MD5. If we exit out of configuration mode and issue the command show IP OSPF neighbor, we'll see we're down to just switch 3. We've lost switch 4. Let's go log in to switch 4 and configure him with MD5. Show run interface Ethernet 5. Config interface Ethernet 5 IP OSPF authentication, enter, and then IP OSPF message digest key, and here key 1 again, and then MD5 space question mark and our key, secrets, enter. Verify our config with show run interface Ethernet 5, enter. We have our authentication enabled and it's MD5, and then show IP OSPF neighbor, enter. And we can see that once again we're neighbored up with switch 5.